nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumīśvaram. Itam Sri Radhika-prana nāta-pada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasya dattam tam Sri Gurum bhaje. Sri Govinda pararavinda marupananya bilashojitan purna prema rasotsavo jalamano vritti prasannananan. Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payurasho Mudakelato Bande Bhagavatani Mananudabam Murdna Nipatyakshito. Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripakrite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambujo Radha Madana Mohano Adadanastrinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambujo Dhulisyam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasyati Balashva Bashvavara Sri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Haichurastam Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Parakamala Shrita Chetasame Chittam Satam Nirup Marukariyatu Padapadme Ya Bhakti Nikilarta Varga Janani Ya Brahma Sakshat Kriter Anandatishaya Prada Vishaya Jat Sukyat Vimuktir Yaya Shri Radha Ramanam Param Bhuja Yugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Ya Karya Vrajaloka Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Ya Ramya Nikilagha Shanga Shamani Shrotra Tritim Sangata Ya Svadhya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Ya Dhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna, Mahasagar, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Charjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire in this earth, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we continue our discussion of Padyavali. And today we'll take up the final verse in this prakaran we've been discussing for some time, that of Sotsukya Prarthana, or prayers full of eagerness. So in our last discussion, we concluded discussion of Sriman Mahaprabhu's 6th verse in his Shikshastakam, where he prays for prema as he calls out Sri Krishna's name. So following this, Rupa Goswami cites the 4th verse of the Shikshastakam as the final verse in this section on prayers full of eagerness, or Sotsukya Prarthana. So today we'll introduce this 4th verse of the Shikshastakam and move into some of the explanation of it. And as I've done so far with the verses of Sriman Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam, the commentary is a little bit more elaborate and offers a bit more cross-reference and relevant points from the Bhagavad and other statements of the Gaudiya Acaryas to help us appreciate these fine words of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So, I'm starting from the top of the fresh file as follows. Next, the compiler cites an earlier prayer from Sriman Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam, the fourth verse therein, which is also a prayer filled with eagerness, though more fundamentally for pure bhakti in general, in contrast to prema bhakti specifically, as was expressed in the aforecited sixth verse of the Shikshastakam. Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad introduces this fourth verse of Sriman Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam as follows. So, quote, as he spoke, Prabhu's humility intensified, and he began to pray to Krishna for pure bhakti. The nature of prema is that one in whom there is a connection with prema thinks, I don't have even a trace of prema for Krishna. So those who have prema feel that they don't. Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad explained earlier in his discussion of the Shikshastakam that Sriman Mahaprabhu spoke the second verse, which is cited earlier in Padyavali 31, out of humility and dejection, bishad. And in the commentary on this verse here in Padyavali, it was explained that such humility and dejection arose in Sriman Mahaprabhu's heart as a result of his intense longing for prema and his feeling himself to be devoid of that. In regard to the third verse in the Shikshastakam, cited earlier in Padyavali 32, Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad explained that Sriman Mahaprabhu describes therein the characteristics of the manner by taking Sri Bhagavan's name, by which prema for Sri Bhagavan can become manifested into the heart by Sri Bhagavan's grace. After explaining this third verse, Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad states in the aforecited payars that Sriman Mahaprabhu felt further intensified humility after he stated the third verse of his Shikshastakam, and that this intensified humility gave rise to the fourth verse in his Shikshastakam. So as we've seen, and as I've repeatedly mentioned, if you read Kaviraj Goswami's explanation of the Shikshastakam, then every verse is an expression of a further degree of humility or dainya than the last. And he repeatedly emphasizes this as the progression goes through. So to be attended to here is what was the reflection, what was the contemplation that went on in the heart of Mahaprabhu after stating the third verse that inspired a fresh degree of dainya within his heart such that he expressed the fourth verse. In other words, what's between the lines, so to speak, in the third and fourth verse. So I've got a couple of explanations as follows. This intensified humility, moreover, can be understood to arise from Sriman Mahaprabhu's reflecting on the characteristics he described in the third verse, namely humility, tolerance, non-conceitedness, and respectfulness. Feeling himself to be devoid of these, and then feeling himself to be beset with inner impediments, and thus unable to aptly engage in the manner of Krishna Kirtan that can give rise to a manifestation of prema within the heart. Then, confronting the difficulty of removing these impediments, and acutely feeling the absence of prema within himself because of them, on account of his intense longing for prema, Sriman Mahaprabhu turns his attention back to Sri Krishna, and in the fourth verse prays both for pure bhakti and affirms his resolve of non-ambition for objects other than pure bhakti. By doing so, he also implies that it is inclinations or vasanas, desires and pursuits of other objects that are the impediments to the manifestation of pure bhakti and prema within the heart. So this is one explanation, is that he speaks the third verse to explain the means by which one can do namakirtan that will give rise to prema, meaning there are many ways to do namakirtan. Not all of them will result in prema for Krishna, but the one that will is the one he describes, the one that's done with dainya, tolerance, respectfulness, and so on. So then, thinking, okay, I need to do kirtan like that. I need to do kirtan in this manner. And then, in the spirit of a bhakta, feeling that he doesn't have the ability to do that, and feeling that he doesn't have that ability because there are things internally impeding him from doing that. And then realizing that because I don't have that ability, because of these impediments, I'm not able to do the process which is going to lead to that object. So I'm not going to get the object until these impediments are removed, and I really want that object, or I feel very much the absence of that object within me. So when someone deeply longs for something they don't have, then they feel a sense of unsuccessfulness or a sense of being unfulfilled, which is how we've repeatedly referred to Sanatana Gosvami's glosses of the term dainya from Brihad Bhagavatamrita. So this state of want of something and it being impeded in the attainment of it gives rise to a feeling of unsuccessfulness and a feeling of lowliness, which is precisely how Sanatana Pad defines humility. So then with that humility, he prays for what is required to remove those obstacles. So the obstacles fundamentally are these desires for other things. So he expresses to Krishna or to Bhagavan his resolution to not pursue those things and to pursue only bhakti. Because when that one-pointedness of aim and pursuit can come about, then, in other words, when the impediments of other desires are absent, then that manner of chanting can be realized, and then by means of that chanting, one can become fit to receive a manifestation of prema. So this is one way that we can read between the lines, so to speak, and see the progression of thought in the Shikshastakam. Alternately, it can also be seen that after stating the third verse, Sriman Mahaprabhu engaged in Krishna Kirtan with the qualities mentioned in the third verse, and thereby experienced a manifestation of prema within his heart that gave rise to an intensified state of humility, and consequently the prayer in the fourth verse that is expressed out of such humility. So you can say after he said the third verse, then he did follow it. This is another way of seeing it, is that then he did do kirtan with dainya, with tolerance, with non-conceitedness, and this did lead to this manifestation of prema in his heart. But just as the payar that Kaviraj Goswami just spoke, when you actually have prema, you feel that you don't. So thus, his prayer for not even prema, so to speak, but for pure bhakti, and his expression out of a sense of need to affirm that he doesn't desire these other objects, can be seen as actually an expression of him really having no desire for those other objects, and of him actually having bhakti. So it's perhaps counterintuitive, but this is how it can also be understood, is that because he does have prema, he's praying to get bhakti or to get prema, because when you have it, you feel that you don't. So it can also be interpreted in that way. As was explained earlier in the commentary on the third verse in Sriman Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam, with reference to discussion in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, prema and humility have a mutual cause and effect relationship, such that one who has prema proportionately feels humility in the form of a feeling of lowliness and a lack of successfulness, a lack of bhakti, within themselves, that in turn further augments their prema, that then further augments their humility, and so on. Thus, that Sriman Mahaprabhu is said to speak this fourth verse with intensified humility can be understood to imply that he, in his absorption in the bhav of a bhakta, is imbued with prema, and that it is this prema that is the cause of his feeling of humility that gives rise to the prayer made in the fourth verse. Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad thus states, the nature of prema is that one in whom there is a connection with prema thinks, I don't have even a trace of prema for Krishna. The implication is thus that although Sriman Mahaprabhu is actually immersed in prema, he prays in this fourth verse for pure bhakti as though he is someone devoid of any genuine bhakti at all, and instead only longing for it. By offering this prayer, he also instructs aspiring bhaktas what is to be prayed for at the feet of Sri Bhagavan. That is, what is the most fundamental and essential object to desire. And conversely, what ought not be desired by aspirants on the path of pure bhakti. So as this text is entitled the Shikshastakam, or the poem of 8 verses of instruction, evidently it also carries the import of having the purpose of giving instruction to sadhakas. So what would be the instruction of giving this prayer? It's obviously an instruction by way of suggestion or implication. So by praying, I don't want this, I don't want that, I only want bhakti, what's the teaching? The teaching is, don't aspire for anything other than bhakti, desire only bhakti, realize why bhakti alone is the only worthy object to pursue. So these are points that we'll discuss in detail as the commentary unfolds. But as for this idea of praying for or desiring only prema bhakti and not any other object, we also find a statement of this exact same effect in the Priti Sandarbha from Sri Jiva Gosvami. So, in this regard, Sri Jivapad has also explicitly explained that an aspirant on this path makes no prayer for any object other than prema bhakti. So he says, Teshu ajata pritibhi sarva purusharta tvena tat pritir eva prarthaniya. Priti for him, namely Bhagavan, is alone to be prayed for as being all purushartas. That is, as the sum total of all purushartas, meaning as the one all-encompassing purusharta, by those in whom Priti has not yet manifested among them. That is, among those who are one pointed upon Sri Bhagavan. So people may pray for the well-being of friends and relatives, or pray for, the world to not have wars, or whatever. So many things that, in a conventional sense, are perfectly natural to desire. But in terms of what truly someone holds at heart as what they aspire for, and what is most efficacious to actually pray for, then from this statement of Mahaprabhu, from this statement of Jiva Goswami, it's very clear that this one-pointedness of desire is essential to proceeding on this path of Uttama Bhakti or pure Bhakti. If you want to pursue on the path of Bhakti, not necessarily pure Bhakti, but Bhakti in general, then you can pray for so many things. You can go to the temple and pray for whatever you like, just like billions or, at least hundreds of millions of other, Hindus or, theists in general who attend, religious services and centers and establishments and, express their desires for all sorts of things. So to follow the path of pure bhakti is very different from all of that, because there's no aim in receiving anything from Bhagavan other than prema from him, which is not actually to receive anything from him, it's actually to receive the capacity to give oneself in full to him, so to speak, as we discussed in the previous section where Mahaprabhu prayed in the words of Kaviraj Goswami, Das kori vetana more deho prema dhan. Give me the wealth of prem as a salary and make me your servant, or let me serve you, and as my remuneration, just give me prema, just give me the psychological orientation such that I seek only to please you, seek only to give of myself to you. So these points, this one-pointedness of desire, is very, very significant to the spirit of this path given by Rupa Goswami, as he defines at the beginning of the text of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu in the definition of Uttama Bhakti. He begins with the phrase Anya Bilashita Shunyam, that this Uttama Bhakti is free from desirousness of any other object apart from Bhakti, as Jiva Goswami explains it. So this is a topic that we're going to go into quite a bit of detail in as this commentary unfolds. So I won't go into it further here, but just note thus far, what is the primary instruction to be derived from this prayer? That Bhakti alone is to be desired. Bhakti alone is to be prayed for. And we have Jiva Goswami, as he goes about defining Priti and establishing Priti as the ultimate Purushartha, make this very same point, that for sadhakas, there's only one thing to be prayed for, and that is Prem Bhakti. So, now a little bit more background regarding this statement and the Shikshastakam in general. Finally, it can also be borne in mind in this regard that Bhagavan Sri Krishna descends as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for two principal reasons. Fundamentally, he descends because of his profound love for his bhaktas, specifically the gopis of Braja led by Sri Radhika. When in the course of their eternal Leela together, he acutely feels the sweetness of their love for him to exceed even the sweetness of his own love for them. So this is how Sanatana Pad frames the descent of Mahaprabhu in his verses at the beginning of the Bhagavatamrita. Svadaita nija bhavam yo vibhavya swabhavat sumaduram avatirno bhaktarupena lobhat jayati kanakadhama krishna chaitanya nama hirihayati vesha shishachi sunuresha. Bearing a golden luster, the name Krishna Chaitanya, and the garb of an ascetic, he who has descended here in this world with the form of a bhakta. Why? Out of intense desire, after reflecting on the fine sweetness of the bhava for himself of his own beloveds, in comparison to his own bhava for them. He, Hari, as the son of Sri Shachi, triumphs. So he feels the bhav he has for the gopis, he feels and he observes the bhav that they have for him, and on some occasion he feels that their bhav is even richer than mine, it's even sweeter than mine. I feel the intense desire to experience what it's like to have that bhav for me that they have. So, out of desire to experience that, to relish that, Krishna appears as Mahaprabhu and triumphs. So this is also given by Sri Rupa Damodar, as discussed in the Charitamrita. Feeling overwhelmed in this way, lowercase, Sri Krishna desires to experience for himself directly in first person what it is like to have the prema for himself found superlatively in Sri Radhika specifically. So Sri Rupa Damodar writes, Sri Radhaya pranaya mahima kidrisha yanaiva swadyo yenad bhuta madhurima kidrisho vamadiya sokam chasya madanu bhavata kidrisham veti lobhat Tadbhavadya samajani shachigarba sindhu harindu. What sort of greatness does Sri Radha's love have? What sort of astonishing sweetness of mind is relishable only by her through that love? And what sort of bliss does she feel as a result of experiencing me through her superlative love? Out of intense desire to experience these three mysteries, the moon Hari, endowed with her bhav, arose from the ocean of Shachi's womb. As his own love for the gopis of Braja, led by Sri Radhika, in this way ascends to another pinnacle of its expression, Bhagavan Sri Krishna also concomitantly wishes to bestow prema for himself upon jivas in samsara, both prema in general and prema that enables specially fortunate jivas to also experience something of that prema of Sri Radhika and the gopis which he personally desires to taste in particular during his avatar as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this also Sanatana Pad as well as Rupa Goswami Pad discuss. Jayati nija parabja prema danavatirno vivida madurim abdi kopi kaishora gandhi gata paramada shantam yasya chaitanya rupa anubhava paramabdam prema gopi shunityam. Someone who descended to bestow prema for his own lotus feet, who is an ocean of various sweetnesses, who is fragrant with adolescence, and whose everlasting prema for the gopis have attained the ultimate limit of the highest state, has reached the position of experience for others, because of whose form of Chaitanya triumphs. And as Rupa Goswami has said, as quoted at the beginning of the Charitamrita, Anarpita charim chirat karunaya avatirna kalo samarpayitum munato jalarasam subhakti shriyam haripurata sundara dyuti kadamba sandipita sadahriraya kandare spuratu vasachinandana. Having graciously descended in the age of Kali to bestow in full his own wealth of bhakti, or the wealth of bhakti to himself, replete with the most elevated brilliant rasa, which had not been offered since long ago. May he, the lion-like Hari, the son of Shachi, fully radiant with beautiful golden luster, be manifest always in the cave of your heart. So these are a brief encapsulation of the two principal reasons for Mahaprabhu's appearance: to taste this bhav as well as to distribute it. So Bhagavan Sri Krishna thus appears as Sriman Mahaprabhu, fulfills these aims, and in doing so shows by example how to follow the path of bhakti and what sort of depth of experience can be reached by doing so. So apane, how does it go here? Apane asvari bhakti kurila prakashe. By personally relishing bhakti, he illuminated it for others. So this is a very nice, simple remark. Apane asvari bhakti kurila prakashe. By personally relishing bhakti, he illuminated it for others. Can we really convey what bhakti is to someone else when we don't relish it ourselves? When we don't have it ourselves? When we don't really experience it ourselves? Can we really convey it to someone else? Rather, we can truly express that or make it clear to someone else what it is if we ourselves actually experience it, if we ourselves actually relish it. And if we do, will words be necessary? Maybe. Or sometimes, or possibly. But our actions, the richness of our character, the qualities that we exhibit, the joy that we can't contain, these things will most likely speak, so to speak, much louder than whatever, statements we quote or arguments we make or what have you. So Mahaprabhu, he has illuminated bhakti to the world by relishing it himself, as have so many great Mahants throughout the ages. And relevant and also in this regard is this statement, Adbhutani Gura Premera Madhurja Mahima Apane Asvari Prabhu Dekaila Sima. That the greatness of the sweetness of prema is astonishing and highly confidential. Personally relishing this, Prabhu showed the extremity of it. In other words, you can show its greatness or its extent by relishing it, and indirectly the effects of that relish that are exhibited by you, even if you try to hide them or contain them. Just quoting some statements or giving some discourse is not going to illuminate, or show the extremity of this, but one's relish of it will. So who can better do that? Who can more profoundly do that than Bhagavan himself when he's donned the bhava of a bhakta? So this is the wonderful, supreme blessedness, the supreme compassion, the supreme munificence of Sri Krishna in appearing as Sriman Mahaprabhu. So why am I bringing these points here? This is explained lastly. This fourth verse of Sriman Mahaprabhu Shikshastakam, as well as all the other verses in this composition, can thus be understood to be both a presentation of instructions for aspirants following the path of bhakti, and heartfelt expressions of Bhagavan Sri Krishna himself as he relishes the intertwined prema and humility at the heart of a bhakta's bhav, having become so charmed by the mahabhav of Sri Radhika that he elects to absorb himself in both the bhava of his bhaktas in general and this mahabhava of Sri Radhika specifically, to such a profound extent that he even loses awareness of his own self and ardently prays for bhakti as though he has no bhakti at all, despite himself being the supreme source and paragon of prema bhakti for his bhaktas. So what a wonderful ornament of contradiction. He who receives more bhakti than anyone, he who shows more bhakti to his bhaktas than anyone, is here praying, please let me have bhakti. I don't want any money. I don't want anything else. that prema can do such things. In other words, that it can inflict, if you will, such an appetite, such a voracious desire for bhakti, that even he who is steeped in bhakti to the most profound extent, as both a recipient and a bearer, feels himself to be in need of begging for it. This is wonderful. This is definitely something to contemplate. So one way this has been depicted, if you will, is in the following payar, where Kaviraj Goswami writes, Krishna re nachai, preman bhakti re nachai, apane nachai tine nache aktai. Prema makes Krishna dance, makes bhaktas dance, and itself dances. The three thus dance together. So in other words, this whole, all these psychological dynamics that churn out all of these prayers, and this feeling of absence even in the midst of presence, and this feeling of hunger even in the midst of relish, all these apparent contradictions, this can be all staged as the dance of Krishna and his bhaktas and prema in and through and with one another. And that the Shikshastakam is, the outcome, if you will, or one of the steps in this dance, or one of the moves that comes out in the course of engaging in this dance. So the fundamental source of the intensified humility that gives rise to this fourth verse of Sriman Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam, as well as all the other verses in the Shikshastakam, can thus be understood to ultimately be the Mahabhav of Sri Radhika, which is itself possessed of the ultimate depth of humility, and so inspires such humility even in Sri Krishna himself. As per Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad's elucidation of the Shikshastakam, however, it is only in the final 2 verses among the 8 verses in the Shikshastakam, which are cited later here in Padyavali 324 and 337, that Sriman Mahaprabhu speaks specifically from a state of direct absorption in Sri Radhika's bhav. So I say this because different, persons who've made editions of the Charitamrita in Bengali, different scholars, Sanskrit commentators, some have presented some or other verses in the Shikshastakam as being expressions of Radharani's bhav or expressions of Krishna relishing some aspect of Radharani's bhav. So here I'm giving a kind of generalized idea of this, that in principle you can regard the whole thing as having that as its ultimate cause, but if you look at it specifically in the analysis of Kaviraj Goswami, if we privilege his interpretation above those of later writers, that it's only in the last 2 verses that specifically the statements are noted to be outcomes of Krishna absorbed directly in a state of self-awareness of himself being Radharani, or absorption in her bhav in that direct or ultimate sense. So like this, it seems that you can kind of safely take it in that way, and if someone wants to draw out some finer subtleties, let them do so. So in this way, we come to the 4th verse of the Shikshastakam, which is as follows: Na dhanaṁ, na janam, na sundarīṁ, kavitāṁ va jagad-īśa kāmaye, mama janmani janmanīśvare, bhavatād bhaktir ahaitukī tvayi. O Lord of the universe, I desire neither wealth, nor people, nor beautiful women, nor poeticism. In birth after birth, O Īśvara, let me have causeless bhakti to you. Sri Kaviraj Goswami Pad restates the import of this prayer as follows: I do not pray for wealth, people, poeticism, or beautiful women. O Krishna, please graciously grant me pure bhakti. Numerous prayers of similar import can be found in the Shastra and the poetry of earlier Mahats. So in the second to last verse of the Bhagavatam itself, we hear the following: Bhave bhave yatha bhakti parayos tavajayate, tata kurushva devesha natastvam no yatha prabho. O Lord of the Devas, please act so that bhakti to your lotus feet appears within us birth after birth, since you are our master, O Prabhu. And in this statement of Prahlad Maharaj, which is from the Vishnu Puran, which immediately precedes his prayer for Priti that we discussed earlier, and from which Jiva Goswami derives his overall definition of Priti or Prema. Nat yoni sahasreshu yeshu brajamyaham teshu teshvachuta bhakti rachutes tu sada tvayi. O Nata, wherever I go in the course of thousands of births, may I always have unwavering bhakti to you, the unwavering Lord. So there's a play here on the word Achyuta. So Achyuta is a name of Bhagavan, and the word Achyuta refers to that which does not waver, or that which does not deviate or fall. So then he uses the word Achyuta also as a qualifier of bhakti, as, quote, unwavering bhakti. So, O Achyuta, let me have Achyuta bhakti. And by using this choice of words and this specific address to Krishna, there's an intended contrast with what's stated in the previous half of the verse, that in the course of thousands of births, in other words, in the course of one birth, we certainly encounter all sorts of turbulence, if you will. So here he's saying, I'm ready for thousands of the times around of this. I'm ready for all the perils and uncertainties and challenges of material existence thousands and times over. So I'm ready to be in the midst of thousands, if not crores, of causes by which bhakti could waver. And all I pray is that I may have unwavering bhakti to you, O unwavering Lord. So also, a verse we hear in the Sindhu, cited by Sri Rupa Prabhupada, Na dharmam kamam artam va moksham va varadeshvara pratai tava padabje dasyam eva kāmaye. I do not pray for dharma, kama, artha, or moksha, O Īśvara of all bestowers of boons. I earnestly desire only servitude to your lotus feet. So as we'll get to later in this verse, the same dynamic is here in this statement by addressing Bhagavan as Varadeshvara. So Varada is itself a name that's sometimes used for Bhagavan and sometimes used for devas in general, meaning boon giver or bestower of boons. So he's saying Varadeshvara means he who is the Īśvara of givers of boons or bestowers of boons. In other words, if there's anybody who can give you anything, it's he who is the greatest or the master even of everyone who gives boons. So if you were to ask for a boon from someone who has that kind of capacity to give boons, the implied sense is that you could get whatever you want. There's nothing that you couldn't have. So even when he's addressing that Īśvara of all bestowers of boons, he says, I don't want dharma, artha, kama, or moksha. I don't want any of the purusharthas that everyone is busy praying to all sorts of bestowers of boons to receive. I want only dasyam. I want only service to your feet, he says. So a statement very similar to this statement here of Mahaprabhu. And also the following verse in the Bhagavatam. Kamam bhava svavrijinair niraishu nastyat cheto livad yadi nute parayo rameta vachas chanas tulasivad yadi tengrishobha puryete gunaganair yadi karnarandra. So this is a statement by the Kumaras. They say, at will let our birth occur in hells as a result of our own wrongful actions. If there our minds may enjoy in your feet like bees, if there our speech may be endowed with the beauty of your feet like tulasi, and if there the holes in our ears may be filled with praise of your qualities. In other words, if I can hear Hari Katha, if I can hear Hari Kirtan, if I can have the chance to speak about the beauty of your feet, about your beauty, and if my mind can always feel pleasure in your feet, in other words, in thought of you, in remembrance of you, then let me even exist in a hellish condition. In other words, if I have that all-essential, most profound bliss, then I don't care what other circumstances I have to deal with. So in other words, I'm one-pointedly interested in bhakti, and I'm even ready to undergo any and all hardships, should that be deemed suited by you. And then finally, a couple of verses from the Mukundamala Stotram. Naham bande tava charanayor dvanda madvanda heto kumbhipakam gurumapi hare narakam napanetum. Ramya Rama Mridu Tanulata Nandane Napirantum Bhave Bhave Hridaya Bhavane Bhavayam Bhavantam. O Hari, I bow at the two of your feet, not for the sake of non-duality, that is to attain moksha, nor to evade the fearsome hell of boiling oil, nor even to enjoy the creepers of the supple bodies of beautiful women in Nandana, that is, the pleasure garden of Indra and Svarga. Birth after birth in the temple of my heart, may I meditate upon you. Nasta dharme nasuvachanichaye naiva kamo pabhoghe yad yad bhavyam bhavatu bhagavan purva karmanurupam etat pratyam mama bahumatam janma janmantarepi tvat param bhoja ruha yugagata nischala bhaktirastu. I must say, some of these statements in the Mukunda Mala are very nice to read. He says, I have interest neither in dharma, nor in riches, meaning artha, nor in partaking of objects of enjoyment, that is kama. Whatever ought to be, let it be, O Bhagavan, in accord with my past karma. My greatly cherished, desired end is this. Indeed, in birth after birth, let me have unwavering bhakti fixed upon your two lotus feet. So, the Vishnu Puran, the Bhagavatam, the Mukundamala Stotra, other texts cited by Rupa Goswami, we find all of these statements which echo the very same statement made here by Mahaprabhu. In birth after birth, let me have causeless bhakti to you. But what you might say is the distinguishing feature in these statements, some qualify the bhakti that is prayed for as unwavering, the statement of Prahlad, and the statement in the Mukundamala. Some of them don't qualify the bhakti specifically, but the implication is that it is pure bhakti that is being prayed for. But what is, perhaps specially noteworthy about Mahaprabhu's statement is that he qualifies the bhakti that he's praying for as ahaitukī, what is called causeless bhakti. So this is something we're going to look at in detail. What is meant by this idea of causelessness or ahaitukatva? So that will come shortly. And I think maybe I'll just stop here because from now on we start getting into the specifics of what's stated as the items that are negated, and then the object that is prayed for, and then we get into the details of Uttama Bhakti or ahaitukī Bhakti. So it might be smoother to jump into that in a fresh reading. So I'll conclude here for today. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free to share. Yes, Ji.
Pranam.
Pranam.
This verse, bhave bhave yatha bhakti, where does it come from?
The second to last verse of Bhagavatam.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you.
All right, well then, let us be at that for today. So we've ventured into this fourth verse of the Shikshastakam. We've looked at what is the underlying humility, this bhav of a bhakta that has given rise to this prayer for bhakti, and how it is that someone can be a bhakta and then feel themselves to be devoid of bhakti and pray for bhakti, and how the instance of this feeling of absence is actually a symptom of presence, and that thus this statement is both a teaching for others as well as a manner of relishing bhakti, or relishing the humility that emerges in the heart of a bhakta. All of these elements are combined. So in our next reading, we'll look at the details of why some of these elements are negated, why bhakti is most worthy of being the ultimate purushartha, and what type of bhakti specifically is that ultimate purushartha. So very, very essential topics, which are to the point of, the very spirit of the entire path that we follow as aspirants in the community of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, followers of Sri Rupa and Sanatana. So some very important points to come in the forthcoming discussion. Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Shyam, Radhe.